Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. I am John Schmeelk. Welcome back, a friend of the program. You'll be seeing him on our programming over the course of the next couple months, getting ready for the NFL draft. Dave Syvertsen, who covers the draft for Ourlads.com. Dave, how are you, man?
Awesome, John. This is one of my favorite parts of the process right now because we don't have a lot of clarity on what the draft will look like in April because of free agency and coaching hires. So right now you have to look under every single stone, cross every T, dot every I, and that's the best way to learn about a draft class is to dive head first. And I know we still both have a little ways to go, but really excited to get the ball rolling because we're just at the start.
Yeah, and the early process is fun, right? Because we're not worrying about team needs. We're not worrying about, things like that. We're just worried about the players. Who are these
Yep.
players? What are they about? Where do they fit in? How does this draft class compare to other draft classes? And that's kind of what we're going to do today. We're going to set a primer for most football fans and NFL fans and Giant fans that haven't paid much attention to the draft over the past 4 or 5 months, though. I recommend you go check out Tony Pauline and I on draft season. You can catch up on all this stuff. But this will kind of be a one-stop half-hour podcast. This is the draft class. This is what the Giants are looking at 3. This is what Giant fans have to worry about. All right, so let's start here, Dave. And we kind of were chatting before we started. Not a great draft to be picking in the top 10. Last year was the opposite. The Giants are picking at 6, and they got a player that could have went top 1 or 2 or 3 in most other drafts.
Yeah.
This year, not the case. Now, the Giants could be fortunate at 3, where one of the 1 or 2, what I would consider elite position players, are sitting there for them. But why don't you kind of put the top 10 of this draft class in context to maybe last year's class and other classes fans might be familiar with?
What's going to be a standout trait to this draft class, and you'll see as we get closer, this is going to become more and more clear that there is a growing trend in media in the league about the value of positions, premium positions, if you will, the tackles, the edge defenders, the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, and in this class, the best players don't play those positions. And some of the weak points of this draft class, and I don't want to say that there aren't good players. There are very good players at every single position in this draft. But when you're talking about the Blue Goose, the Prime Grays, the guys that you project to be all pros, they don't play those premium positions. So what I'm really interested to see in this draft, how much does that matter in the top 10? Because the best, I would say 2 of the best 7 players in this draft, one is a tight end and one is a running back. But those guys, it's looked down upon if you draft them in the top
And
10.
by the
It's
way,
been
Dave, you
working
could
out.
even argue another top guy plays safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Malachi Starks, absolutely. And then you talk about the defensive tackles, other than, Abdul Carter, who I'm sure we'll talk about. The D tackles in this group, I might take them over most of the edge defenders. And I do know the Dexter Lawrence contract and Aaron Donald changed the game a little bit, but the edge defender is still the premium position up front, but the players inside are better. So I'm really curious to see how much does that actually impact where a guy gets drafted.
No, you're right. And it was the opposite last year, right? You had wide receivers, you had offensive tackles, you had all those types of positions that were super valuable last year, quarterback, obviously. And that's really
Yep.
not the case this year. So let's start with the non quarterbacks first. And don't worry, Giant fans, we will get to the quarterbacks. But you mentioned, who would you consider the elite position players in this year's class that you would be pretty comfortable, and you can include position value in this if you want, that you would feel comfortable in pretty much any draft class drafting them in the top 10?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still in the school of thought that you can take a running back, and I don't think the Giants are going to go down this path. I would bet against it, obviously, but
Yeah, me too.
Ashton Genty is kind of like my personal prototype running back. The guy has led the country in broken tackles over the past 2 years by a country mile. He's got a PhD in just breaking through contact and contact bounds. He led the country in 70, 60, and 50-yard runs, and the next guy was less than half the amount of what Genty did. I mean, we're talking about a legitimate Saquon Barkley caliber grade at that running back position. I think in any draft, he's a top 10 caliber guy. We just saw Bijan Robinson go top 10. We've seen Detroit reach, as we put it back in the day, for Jahmyr Gibbs, and that's worked out pretty well. We're looking at the biggest running back contracts that were given in the offseason. Their teams are still in the playoffs. I mean, that is a thing that I think we're going to see happen in this draft, and it would happen in any draft. Ashton Genty goes top 10. Tyler Warren, to me, is a TJ Hawkinson, a former top 10 pick. He's another Brock Bowers caliber player, a different kind of player. He actually plays with his hand in the dirt and can block in line. But that's another guy that I would be comfortable taking in the top 10. But the question that I would love to get your input on, if you've seen these guys so far, at wide receiver, we just saw that top three last year. Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze. That was like the cream of the crop. But then you see names like Brian Thomas and Ladd McConkey come in, and those guys had made the Ourlads All-Rookie team, which comes out this week. I mean, do you really see a top 10, a guy in this draft worthy of taking at that high in the draft at that position? And that's where I get a little shaky, is at wide receiver.
I would think about Ted McMillan at the bottom half of the top 10.
Yep.
That would be the one guy. I'm not a Luther Burden guy. I wouldn't pick him that high.
Hmm.
I think the better question, and now we can hit on Travis Hunter here, right? Because he's kind of
Yeah.
like the really unique player.
Yep.
If he was just a wide receiver and
Hmm.
not also a cornerback, or if he was just a cornerback and not just a wide receiver, would he be a top 10 player? My thought on that is if he was just a cornerback, yes. If he was just a wide receiver, no. Where do you stand on that?
I see him as a wide receiver, body type, movement traits, and ball skills as Garrett Wilson. He's in that same like 5'11", 180 pounds, slightly undersized, but unbelievably fast. I don't know if we truly know how fast this kid is. According to GPS tracking, he was the second fastest player in all of college football last year,
Wow.
out of 6,900 players. I mean, think about that. That's including Xavier Worthy. It's like this is the kind of guy that might run in the low 4.2s, and you put a number like that on this kind of player, that's a top 10 pick to me all day. But my hesitation with drafting him high. I need full cohesion in the room of what the plan is for him. Are you actually going to try and play him both sides? It's never been done at a level that what he did in college. We've seen guys flash on both sides of the ball, but nothing what Travis Hunter did in college. Do we really think he can do that at the next level? And this is where the organizations that are constantly contending the playoffs, there's cohesion from owner to front office to coaching staff. And I would love to try him on offense first. I think
Okay.
the upside as a corner is a little limited, not a very big guy. And I just think the way the league is right now, give me points. Put points on the board and you try to manufacture a good enough defense, especially for a team like the Giants, who have just been in the cellar for so long. And the offense has been the main issue for that long.
Okay, I'm going to give you the counterpoint to that because I think this is going to be a
Yeah,
fun conversation
absolutely.
that we're going to have for the next 3 months. Now, I think if you're going to try to do both, it's easier to be a full-time corner and a part-time wide receiver. You don't see many guys that, all right, you're playing for 15 snaps at corner. You have to know how to pass guys off. You don't have to work with your safeties. It's much easier to put together a 12 to 15 play package on offense than it is to put together a 12 to 15 play package on defense. And I do think just from a playing the wide receiver, just skill wise and, the ins and outs of it, I think he's much more raw than Garrett Wilson was coming out, for example. Not as good of a route runner, things like that. Even though I'm with you, I think the physical profile matches actually pretty well. I haven't heard that one before. I think it's really good.
Mhm.
That's my argument for why I'm thinking full-time corner, but you still try to get your dozen plays on offense in, 2 minute when it's a little simpler. Um, Big third down plays, specific packages for him.
Yeah, I would never argue against him being a corner and a part-time offensive player because again, like I do think logistically it just makes more sense. And it's real like defense and playing corner. We can see it with Deontay Banks right now. You need a lot of reps to develop. You can't just be talented to play corner. You need to get a lot of reps. And if you are going to limit him on that side of the ball, the likelihood of him reaching the ceiling. But what we're saying right now, these are the conversations teams are going to
Yeah.
have. You don't want to draft him and say we'll figure it out later. All of those decisions need to be made prior to drafting him. And if you don't feel there is cohesion in that room, you will not reach the fantasy of what Travis Hunter presents.
And
It's
Dave,
just
by
going
the
to
way,
be,
real quick, what does he
yeah,
want to do? Right? Like, is he all in on playing corner or is he all in on playing wide receiver?
great
You don't want
question.
to pick this guy this high and try to force him into a spot. He
Yep.
might, and I don't know. Some guys might be thinking, well, Just look at the average contract for a wide receiver versus the average contract for a corner. Why
Yeah.
would I want to play cornerback? So I don't know what
Yep.
Hunter's thinking. Teams got to figure that out too.
Yep. I mean, if you rattle off, you go into a sports bar and you start talking about the top 10 wide receivers in football, everybody will know who you're talking about every time you bring up a new name. You bring up the 10 best corners in football, most of those guys will know the top three or four, but they don't know the rest. The marketing, the money opportunities, and is that what fuels him? I don't know Travis Hunter well enough to say yes or no, but I would assume if I'm him and he's my son, wide receiver is the route to go, and you do have to. Those conversations with him will be crucial to where he ends up going and how and what organization drafts him come April.
David, I don't know if organizations think this way, and this will be my last thing on Hunter. And I think if I'm picking the first position player, I think he's probably the first guy I pick. And I
Mm.
think the reason is simply this: I get two bites at the apple, right? We've
Yep.
seen, for example, corners that get picked really high in this league flame out. It happens, right?
Yep.
It's just the way that it's a tough position to play. Well, you know what? If you get through a year with Travis Hunter and you say, wait a second, I don't think this is going to work. Well, you can just slide him onto offense. So you almost get
It's a
two
hedge.
shots at the player at two different spots, which makes the chance of the pick failing even smaller. And
Yep.
to give yourself that type of safety net, if the first position doesn't work out, I think that just gives you so much value and backstop as a front office to
Mhm.
reduce the risk of your pick. That if it doesn't work at corner, all right, let's slide him at wide receiver. And we've already seen proof of concept at that spot in college.
You're exactly right. It's a hedge, and any big decision making, especially when it's an investment like this, short term, long term dividends, right? The proper way to do it is hedge where you can, and that it's a great hedge. The problem with the NFL, if you're going to change the plan for him next year, now it just becomes a really muddy situation, and that's why I think that you go into it saying this is what we're doing with him. And then if it doesn't work out after 3, 4 years, sure, you can kind of pivot to another side. But are you even going to be here in 3 to 4 years if it doesn't work out? So that's a really complex situation. It's one of the most unique I've ever seen since I started doing this.
Yeah, it really is. It's gonna be fun to kind of debate. The other guy, I'm with you. I think Genty's a top 10 guy. I'm not sure. I've not finished my Warren tape yet. I was gonna wait for the season to end and then kind of go through it all. And I'm gonna go try to go through it this week. So I'll push him aside just for me because I have not done my full study of him yet.
Yep.
Um, Abdul Carter's the other position guy that I'm very excited about.
Oh yeah.
And he's only his one season as a full edge rusher. Last year he was an off-ball linebacker. He has that ridiculous speed off the edge to challenge the outside shoulder of the defensive tackle. He's learning a variety of moves. That's the other guy, given the position that he plays in his athletic skill set, Dave, that I would say, all right, top five, I feel okay about picking this guy and his athletic upside and how he can, be that 3-4 defensive end outside linebacker, passing downs, hand in the dirt, rush the passer, and he is going to, be that potentially that TJ Watt type of outside guy that this is going to be a terror trying to rush the passer.
Yeah, I mean, prior to the season, I had him as my number 4 overall player in the class, and it was a little bit of a reach at that point because all we saw were flashes as a
Right.
pass rusher. But what I saw last year, there were a few times I watched his tape last summer. I had to make sure it wasn't, I didn't speed up the rate of watching 1.5 speed. I mean, he literally looks like he's playing at a different speed than everyone else on the field. And then you see there's a physicality to him
Yep.
as well. You see the number 11. You see the Penn State uniform. I hate the helmet scout. I try to avoid it, actually go out of my way to avoid it. It is impossible to not think about Micah Parsons when you're watching this kid play. I mean, their college tape was so similar, the way they pursue the ball across the field, what they can do from the middle of the field, what they can do from the outside. And the draw to an Abdul Carter is that you are not going to have to pigeonhole him into one spot. You can truly move him around. And, a team like the Giants, you say, oh, we have Brian Burns, we have Kayvon Thibodeau if he gets that 5th year. I mean, he will be back next year. And what they do with his 5th year option will be interesting to watch in the coming months. But even if they do both come back, you can still use this guy. You can use all three. You almost need all three. I mean, in my opinion, the Giants, one thing they need to do is that not one, but two more pass rushers to this front to give themselves an identity up front. So Abdul Carter is not stockpiling too much talent at a position. It's adding another weapon to a defense that is very thirsty for more weapons and explosive playmakers. My one question about Carter that I did not have about Parsons coming out, and this is a really important trait to the elite pass rushers in the NFL, is how good is his power game? Can he truly bull rush? Can he push a tackle back into the lap of a passer? I mean, you look at all of the top edge rushers in today's game, all of them. They all have that button they can push and say, you know what? I'm not going around you. I am going through you. I mean, we just saw Jared Verse, who will win the Defensive Rookie of the Year award. There's a lot of sloppiness to his game. He is one of the most powerful edge rushers right away. That translates to the NFL, and that's the one question I have about Abdul Carter.
Yeah, we never got the full season at edge rusher for Parsons, right? That's the reasons he
Yep.
dropped outside the top 10. We only
Yep.
saw like Parsons last year at Penn State was like Carter's previous season, right? Where we saw flashes. He didn't know if he was a
Yep.
pass rusher or not. So yeah, I'm with you on that. So past those two guys, you mentioned the running back and the tight end. We mentioned the safety. If you're picking and you have a blank slate team, so position value matters, who's
Yep.
your next non-quarterback position player that you would have on the board after Carter and Hunter?
I feel incredibly safe with Mason Graham.
Yeah, so do I. I'm with you on that.
And I also feel that there's a ceiling to him that can be one of the top defensive tackles in all the football. Watching this Michigan defensive tackle group was very reminiscent of what we saw at Clemson years ago when we had Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence playing next to each other. Very different players, different draft projections. Christian Wilkins went top 10. Dexter Lawrence, as we know, was in the middle of the first round. And now I would even say I like Dexter Lawrence more than Wilkins. But
Yeah.
when I'm watching these two guys play, it's the same exact feel that I get. Kenneth Grant has this really high ceiling, but he's got a few things he's got to really develop from an arsenal and technique perspective. Mason Graham, as much as we want to be drawn in by the pressure rate and what he can do against one-on-one blocking as he rushes the passer, he is an elite run defender. I mean, this is an every down force that is both quicker and more powerful. He's got the wrestling background. He's going to test out as well as anyone in the defensive tackle group. I feel very safe with this guy, floor and ceiling.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Giants Huddle Podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans can get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. All right, you went Michigan. Sell me on Will Johnson. I've watched his tape for 2 years, and a lot of people still have him in their top 5. And look, I get the appeal. He's long. He has these interceptions. I get all that. On tape, I just see way too many easy catches in front of him that are uncontested. I don't see enough press man, and I can't wrap my head around selecting him as a top 5 pick. Tell me why I'm right or wrong.
I think you're right. I think he's top 15, but I top 5 corner to me is what we've seen in Derek Stingley and Sauce Gardner, guys that you know right away are going to be your quarterback, your number one corner, and they have the ceiling of being a true shutdown guy, which in
I
the
agree.
league there's a handful of them. So to really say you're a top 5 corner at a position just like wide receiver, every year it's a very deep group. It's the way the kids are playing football now, all the way from youth to high school to college. There is so much talent at the position that if I am going to use a top 5 pick on this position, he better be a special. I better project him to be an all-pro caliber guy. And Will Johnson, to me, the measurables are there. The 5-star recruit, the highlight reel is impressive. If that's all you've seen so far, the pick sixes, the anticipation. But I don't know if I trust him being on an island alone with some of the best receivers in the game because he's afraid of getting beat deep. Is there a speed issue? I don't know. I mean, we'll see his tests out. He's very quick. He's got great jumps in his history, but the long speed will be the question with him. And he plays like that too. Another thing I don't like about Will Johnson, and I am one of the few left that do care about this, he is not a physical player. If you watch his tape against the run, he's the kind of guy that makes a lot of business decisions. And we're seeing part of the issue that Giants fans have right now with Deontay Banks is the effort. Is it always there? Does he really want to put his hat in there? I've had a scout told me, hey, we pay the other 10 guys to tackle. We pay the other 10 guys to cover. Give me the corner that can cover. But unless you have Deion Sanders caliber coverage ability, I need you to at least contribute in that element of the game. And physicality to me goes deeper than just run defense. It comes down to effort, pressing guys at the line. So Will Johnson, to me, there are a lot of good traits. There are not enough elite traits, and there are a couple holes that would prevent me from taking him in the top 5.
All right, 2 other spots I want to hit on before we jump to the quarterbacks here, Dave. And
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone's waiting for that. All right, offensive tackle.
Mm.
I don't see any of these guys as top 10 picks. I know you watch Kelvin Banks. You just watch a guy and you say, that guy feels like a really good offensive tackle to me. He moves like a guard to me, and he looks like a guard to me.
Yep.
Good player. I would be happy picking him in the first round in the top 15, top 20. I'd be good with that. Will Campbell, I know his arm length is a big question for a lot of people, but I do think he has tackle feet. I think he moves well, and I think he's athletic enough out there. I think he's very solid in how he plays. But unlike, last year when we had all those tackles early, I mean, these guys would probably be, tackle 4 maybe in last year's draft for me. Like, they don't have me as excited as last year's class for sure.
Yeah, I mean, John, last year we had 9 offensive linemen taken in the first round. We had 6 in the second. We had 10 in the third. I mean, that is 25 total offensive linemen taken in the first 3 rounds. We have that fresh in our memory. That's not normal.
No.
Last year's group was not a normal group. To even put these guys in the same discussion would be disrespectful to last year's group. And I have written on my notes right now, the one position I'm most worried about, if I'm a team looking to add a player it's this position, I'm worried about the tackles. The top guys, Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks, Emory Jones, Gray Zabel. I mean, that's 4 of the top 6 guys in this group. They might be better at guard at the next level. Will Campbell, to me, is Peter Skoronski, a guy that can play tackle, but probably the length concerns and just his sheer ability to anchor and play with power. He probably should play inside, but he
Well,
can
here's
play
my question for you.
outside.
Do you think he has the power in the run game to move people? Because you watch his run blocking at tackle, and, this isn't a guy that's like going to finish through the whistle on a lot of these plays,
In certain schemes, I think he'll be much better. What Dominic Pooney has done in San Francisco, that like wide zone, like that's the kind of guy that I think he could be at the next level. But to answer your question, that's not top 10.
And by the way, I was worried about Pooney's power last year too, which is why I was kind of on the fence with him. But that has worked out for San Francisco.
And that could be scheme based. Like if he got drafted by a different team, we're not talking about a guy that made the Ourlads All Rookie team. We're talking about someone that might not even been a factor this year. The one guy that I like the most is the one that tore his ACL in October, and it's Josh Simmons from Ohio State. His tape was starting to trend towards the best left tackle tape we were watching all year. The ACL injury, but he's out. He's in the draft this year, and he probably will be back just based on historical data with tackles, not players, tackles tearing the ACL. He should be back for training camp. I don't know if he'll be ready for the start of the season, but that to me is the guy that I would want. If I'm looking left tackle, that's the guy I feel safe with. Another one that we're going to get to watch down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, Josh Connerly from Oregon. He's the guy that he has probably the best footwork in the draft. He's very twitchy. He's very balanced. That to me is a big deal with offensive line evaluation at tackle. How balanced are you? And he's got the best in the group. The last name I want you to keep an eye on, put him on your list, is Armin Membu from Missouri. He'll also be at Senior Bowl. And
I watched him last week. I loved him. He is a top of the second round guy for me, end of the first. He is very good at tackle. I was impressed with him. You want to slide him out of right tackle day one? I'd be very, very happy to do that.
And that's exactly what you just said. You said top of round 2. John, if I'm a team looking to add offensive line talent, I'm not considering round 1 for two reasons. The gap between the top 3 and the next 6 might not even exist. They're all going to be very similar grades, and I'm going to use that premium resource elsewhere on the roster. But over the last 4 drafts, over 70% of the guys drafted offensive linemen rounds 2 and 3 have panned out to be at least quality starters. I mean, if you go look at the list of names that get drafted day 2, round 2, and round 3, that's the sweet spot for the offensive line. And I do think come draft time, last year's an anomaly. All right, those guys deserve to be top picks. We can reach for offensive line because you're afraid that there might not be anything left day 2. This year, Every year, there's plenty of talent left day two. Be patient on the offensive line this year. Don't reach. You'll walk away with guys that you can work with.
Especially if you're not looking for a day one left tackle. Those guys sometimes you have to
Yeah.
take a little bit earlier, but if you're okay
Yep.
with guard, center, or right tackle, I think you're right. I'm with you. You can draft them a little bit later.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Giants Huddle Podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. Citizens will donate $750 to the Giants Foundation for each scoring drive during the 2024 season. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants. Real quick answer before we get to quarterbacks. The two Georgia edges. I don't know if I like either of the 10 picks. I think I like Jalen Walker better than Kyle Williams, in my opinion. But I think they're more like top 15, 17 guys that necessarily feel super comfortable with them in the top 10.
They're both projection based. I mean, Jalen Walker has not made that Abdul Carter move to the outside full time. He played a lot of off ball linebacker this year, and his tape, you can clearly tell that's just not going to be his future at the NFL level. But he does have a little bit more power. Like I talked about the shortcoming of Abdul Carter's power potentially holding him back a little bit early on. Jalen Walker has that power. He plays very low. He's got incredibly strong hands. But a lot of his production came from secondary effort, which is fine. You want that. But he did not beat a lot of tackles right away with a wide arsenal of moves. And that does concern me a little bit with there was not a lot of just natural quick wins. I mean, NFL is all about getting quick pressure, not just pressure, quick pressure, because these guys get the ball out so fast. And Jalen Walker is explosive enough, but he does get stalled out by quality tackles a little too long, too often. Kyle Williams is a very ironically similar situation to what Travon Walker was a couple of years ago. Someone that checks every single box you want physically, but it has not turned into a lot of production yet. And that's going to be a defensive line coach saying, hey, I can make that guy into a special player. The scout perspective says, hey, I like the upside of him, but he hasn't done it enough on a consistent basis to really put a high label on him yet. So you are right. I think top 20, top 15 for both, but not top 10.
All right, let's go to the quarterbacks here. We buried the lead. If you took these top two quarterbacks, and maybe those aren't clearly your top two in Ward and Sanders, we can have that conversation too. But if you put this group and combined it with last year's group, when would the first quarterback for you show up? I have Cam Ward probably around my J.J. McCarthy range from last year, and then I probably a little further back. And again, this is not based on what they've done first year in the NFL. This is just based on their pre-draft analysis last year. I would probably have Shador somewhere in that kind of Bo Nix, Penix type of territory for me.
Yeah, I'm with you in terms of stacking those top two guys. I had J.J. McCarthy pretty high. I had him as number 3 last year, slightly ahead of Drake May. So I have Cam Ward more in the tier under those guys. I had 4 guys last year that I would really take at the top of any draft, and that's Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, J.J. McCarthy, Drake May. Cam Ward is right under those guys, and it's because he's not as clean. His footwork is a disaster. He's made a lot of bad decisions under pressure, but the arm talent is legit. I like the ethos that he presents. He's a playmaker. Cam Ward is a guy that will make plays in big moments. The comeback he had at California this year was still, to this day, one of the most impressive fourth quarter comebacks I've ever seen a quarterback ever do. And it was all on his arm. He has that kind of ability to take over a game.
And Dave, to your point, real fast, we watched Jaden Daniels last night, right?
Yep.
So calm
Very
under
calm.
pressure in big moments.
Yep.
Cam Ward never looks flustered. He's always calm, relaxed, and poised.
They call that the slow pulse. Like the heart rate never spikes up no matter what. Never too excited. Did you see his reaction after the game-winning field goal? It's like he kind of just was like, all right, on to the next week. You want that. You don't want a guy that's too excited about winning. You don't want a guy that gets too upset about losing. But there's a lack of polish to him. This is a 0-star recruit that played a wing T offense in high school. He started off at Incarnate Word. I mean, we're not talking about a guy that had a lot of professional caliber development and coaching growing up. And you could look at that from a perspective of saying, hey, we're not even close to this kid's ceiling. Shedeur Sanders, on the other hand, he is unbelievably polished. I love his release. I love his footwork.
He's tough.
But the guy's probably had, to be honest with you, the best quarterback coaching anyone could ever have from being a young kid, being Deion's son. So is he already at his ceiling? Is there anything better that can he get better at anything left? So is there anything left to get better at in his arsenal? But there's a thing to Shadur Sanders that I do think owners, once they start getting involved in these decisions, he's going to make a team relevant. You might like I think Giants fans, if you want to keep the discussion there, they want to win. All right, but there are owners out there, they want to be relevant. They want the primetime games. They want people looking at them and talking about them. Shadur Sanders, and that can help some young players. I mean, I think a Shadur Sanders Malik Neighbors relationship has a lot of potential. They could feed off each other, get the best out of each other. So those two of the guys are probably going to be in the first round discussion. But the one interesting component to this quarterback class, and as you watch more guys, I think you're going to start to see this. The gap between Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders, and then you have your next group of guys, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, even Dylan Gabriel. It's not that big. It's just not a big gap. Where last year, we saw a record amount of picks go between Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler in round 5. There was an enormous gap between the top guys and everybody else. I don't see a big gap. I do think in certain scenarios, there are some advanced metrics that Jackson Dart is actually the best quarterback under pressure in this group. And when I say pressure, I'm not talking about high pressure situations. I'm talking about the actual pass rush. And, because he did, Jackson Dart did kind of blow it at Florida. It was a really rough last 2 minutes of the game for him. And he did the same thing at LSU, did not respond well to high leverage situations. But his talent, his arm talent, his ability to respond to a pass rush, which is often a make or break for a young quarterback, it's right there. So Jalen Milroe has the most explosive electric talent, but he's light years behind these guys as a passer. Will Howard is now starting to show who we thought he was last summer. I thought him a top 5 quarterback, had a rough start, but he checks a lot of boxes when you're looking for the old school prototype. So the question to me is, in this quarterback class, do these top 2 guys really stand out enough? And it's a theme of the class, and it comes back to this positional value that we started off with. Are these guys really worth taking that high in the draft simply because of position, or can you get an equal or a similar graded player around later?
Yeah, or even top round 3, right? Like I think,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any guarantee Jackson Dart's going top round 2. I don't know what teams think
Yep.
about him. Milroe, I think someone will fall in love with his physical attributes and they'll pick him high. But yeah, I'm with you. And I think teams are going to have to be patient with this quarterback class, right? This is not going to be where you have 3 or 4 guys where you're going to plug in, or really 5 for last year, and they're going to look good right away. Like that's just not going to happen. I don't think with this class. I think your best chance is probably Shador. That you can, he's been with Pat Shermer and NFL offense. He's been, to your point, coached up really well. That's the guy I think that you can probably feel good about. Put him right in. You're going to get competent play. But again, he is, and it's funny, people probably don't think about it this way, but he's missing, figure Deion's son is going to be like this hyper athlete. He's not a hyper athlete. He's like a boring pocket passer. Like that's what he is. And that's fine. That's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But like we saw with Jaden Daniels even on Sunday night, that being mobile for a young quarterback fixes so many mistakes that you make as a passer and a processor, that I'm not sure Shador is going to have that in his bag right away, which I think is the only thing that could hold him back a little bit early. While Ward, not a hyper athlete, I think he's a little bit slipperier, right, and can make guys miss in the pocket maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kim Ward, that is the word. It's slippery. He is really good at evading pressure, and he can feel the pressure. That's one thing I don't like about Sanders' game. Sanders' game kind of reminds me of a 7-on-7 quarterback, where there are no offensive linemen, there are no defensive linemen. You kind of just sit back there and just kind of wait a little too long. And there is a lot of talk about how poor his offensive line was, especially last year. He was responsible for just as much of the pressure that he took on himself, because he doesn't feel the pass rush. Cam Ward can feel it, and it's hard to measure with a number. And we're obsessed with analytics and numbers now. It's really hard to measure this, but when you watch it, you can see it. Cam Ward, Patrick Mahomes, these guys, they know where the pressure is almost before it even gets there. I don't see that in Sanders' game. And like you said, he's not fast enough to evade the way he did in college. He's just not. He's not a big guy either, John. He's right now, a measurement I have on him is just over 6 foot, 205. I mean, that is really small for NFL standards unless you have a special athletic ability, which he does not. That's a concern for me, is that size metric.
I'm with you. All right, final question. I got a hard out here. You mentioned offensive tackle being maybe a weaker part of this draft class. I agree. Defensive tackle being a stronger part of this draft class. I agree. Any other positions stick out to you as either being particularly strong or weak as you get into day 2 and day 3 of the class?
This tight end group might be one of the best we've ever seen. And
Ooh, okay.
we have the superstar at the start at the top in Tyler Warren, but then we have breakout studs and Helm from Texas, Brenningstool from Clemson, Arroyo from Miami, who'll be down in the Senior Bowl.
The Michigan kid is good.
Yep, and he had an off year. I mean, he came into the year as the top guy. I think there's going to be. I have 9 grades right now that I think are going to be round 1 or 2 or 3. So starting caliber players. That number is rarely over 6. And where I'm adding 50% of that to this group. So, and all different kinds of tight ends too. Guys with size and can play in line, and guys that can Brock Bowers it and be a wide receiver type player. Harold Fannin is a guy that has like a wild card future to him. We're going to see him down in Senior Bowl. Him and Tyler Warren combined for 2,800 yards this year, dude. I mean, it's an incredible group that I think has a lot of upside.
And then any group that you think is particularly weak besides offensive tackle?
I mean, I feel like I'm saying this year after year now, but the linebackers, I just don't see more than a handful of guys that really can project to be every down players. I see a couple specialty type players, but the top of the linebacker group, I'm just not that excited about, and I don't see a lot of depth either.
Dave, this is awesome. Tell the folks where they can find all your work this year.
Yeah, ourlads.com. You could sign up for a newsletter there. That's a 3-day per week newsletter that we're sending out. We just started this last week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm putting a lot of effort into those, and ourlads_sci on X. I'm being very active there between now and then, and give the YouTube channel, Ourlads YouTube channel, a look. We have mock drafts coming up, a Cam Ward versus Shedeur Sanders video coming up, and we're going to be putting out as much content as we can between now and then. I'll also be at the Senior Bowl, so look for me out there.
Nice. We can hang out. Looking forward to it. We're booking our flights next couple of days. I'll be at Shrine, too, to check out Shedeur, so that should be a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Dave, good stuff. Enjoy the process, and we'll catch up later on, okay?
Thanks, John. We'll talk soon.
Dave Syvertsen from Ourlads.com. We thank you for joining us on the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. We'll see you next time, everybody.